I'm so tired of glitter. I had to take some packages and put them in my car to bring them to the church for the angel tree. And there's glitter all over my car. There's glitter all over my seats. What's amazing about it is when I talk to you, there's glitter on your face. Many of you don't realize when I talk to you, it's all I can do to not start doing this, trying to get you to get that glitter off your upper lip, or because you have glitter everywhere. And I've struggled with that, because it just all over. And then one day I show up. I can't remember what the event was, but my daughter was sitting across from me. And I thought to myself, she looks like she has glitter on her eyelids. And then I thought, matter of fact, she looks like she's got glitter on her lips. And then I realized it was on purpose. It was on purpose that she did that. And it's my own daughter. And I when I brought the gifts to my car and unloaded them for the church, I had it all over my hands. And I couldn't get the glitter off my hands. And I got to thinking, this is just getting a little out of hand. And then I realized, maybe that's a good thing. Because it takes us a whole year at my house to vacuum up the glitter. It just keeps, it keeps producing itself day after day after day. And you vacuum, and then there's more, and you vacuum, and there's more. And maybe the residual benefits of Christmas is kind of like that glitter. I did some research this week, and I had heard recently that Christmas trees, live Christmas trees, were on the decline. That people liked fake Christmas trees better because you can box them up, you don't have to deal with the mess. And so, but now I've heard that live Christmas trees are making a resurgence. In 2012, there were 24.5 million live Christmas trees purchased. That's 7 years ago. There are over 15,000 Christmas tree farms in the United States. There are over 46 million seedlings planted every year by Christmas tree growers. They plant 200 trees per acre, and they make $14,800 per acre. It's a very lucrative business. They replant the trees every 8 years, and they harvest them, and they just keep going. The problem is that when you cut a Christmas tree down, there's a stump. And what they do, rather than take the stumps up, they plant another Christmas tree beside the stump, and they wait 4 or 5 years until there are 4 or 5 stumps where the one stump was, meaning there are 1,000 stumps in an acre of land, and then they hire a gentleman to come in and remove all the stumps. Now, the problem with stumps is they can get full of disease, and they can breed mosquitoes. And so the Christmas tree farmers want to make sure those stumps aren't left around, which is why I find the scripture that we're going to talk about this morning very, very interesting. My first point is this: lessons from a stump. The book of Isaiah was about in the year 739 BC. Isaiah served 4 kings. He was a very, very astute, intelligent man of integrity who worked and served not only kings, but also was a prophet of God himself. And one of the struggles that Isaiah had was he couldn't get people to listen to him. He talked and he talked and he tried to tell them what God had told him, and they just wouldn't listen because they were in a period of plenty. They had more than they needed, and they definitely didn't need to listen to Isaiah. And so Isaiah said something in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, that's very fascinating. He said, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit." Now, what in the world is Isaiah doing talking about a stump? Why is there even a stump there? A stump means something has been cut down. And unfortunately, in our era, in our time, that seems to be in vogue, cutting things down. Cutting God down, cutting people down, cutting Jews down, cutting the church down. That seems to be in vogue today. Friedrich Nietzsche even said, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. We've cut him down. So what's this stump doing? Well, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, right after Adam and Eve sinned, God talks to Adam, God talks to Eve, and God talks to the snake. And what God tells the snake is very interesting. Listen to what God says. "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Now, this is a conversation lots of people don't know was had. Moses records it in Genesis 3 because God wants us to know this conversation took place, and Moses wants us to know the conversation took place. Satan, however, doesn't want us to know this conversation took place. Because in this conversation, God speaks directly to Satan, who has used this snake to seduce Eve to sin. And God says, I just want you to know, from now on, there is going to be enmity, a war, a conflict, hostility, animosity between you and the woman. And it will never go away. I'll put it between your offspring and her offspring. And it will never go away. It's interesting that God says this offspring from the woman, will crush your head while you bruise his heel. And that prophecy has withstood thousands of years. Now, some people think this prophecy was made and that what it says is that people will always be afraid of snakes. That's not what it says. It says that from the beginning in the Garden of Eden until right now, there will be a war, a battle, a conflict that is deep and filled with loathing and hatred that comes because God put it there. It's a battle between Satan and people. And Satan has a deep loathing for people. Unfortunately, people don't have as deep a loathing for him. But God said, and God told both the snake, both Satan and Eve and Adam, that would never go away. And from that moment until now, Satan has done everything he could to cut down God, to cut down people, and to cut down Jews, leaving a stump. And it's been that way for centuries. But God also said, I want you to know that your day is coming. You will crush one of the woman's sons, but you will crush his heel, but he will crush your head. Now that happened about 3,300 years ago. And in 739 BC, Isaiah takes up the same conversation. And he says, in case you forgot, just in case you forgot, there is going to be a shoot that comes out of the stump of Jesse. What you thought was dead, what you thought was over, when you thought life had gone away from this stump, when you thought that there was no hope and that everything was in despair, you're going to see one little shoot come out of the stump you assumed was dead. And that shoot is going to change everyone's life forever. Because the shoot is the one prophesied by God in Genesis 3:15. Life will come from death. Hope will come from despair. The war will continue, but I will have the last say. Now, one of the problems we have in life is we forget that. We all think that terrible things happen and we have tough experiences in life, but we don't realize there's a reason we do, and it's because Satan is behind it. And it's not in vogue to believe that he's there, but I assure you that he is. And God has promised it will always be so until he's dealt with forever by God. And so we need to learn the lessons from the stump. That there will always be difficulty, there will always be temptation, there will always be sin, there will always be despair, there will always be discouragement. But in the midst of all of that, we need to understand that God has promised us there will come a solution. And this is the reason we celebrate Christmas. We celebrate a shoot coming from a stump. Point number 2. God describes and Isaiah describes the shoot. And this is a fascinating scripture to me. Let's read. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. Now, it doesn't say the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon the shoot. He gives the shoot a gender. He says the shoot is him. And Isaiah describes this shoot and says, the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. You know, back in the days when the babies were born in Palestine, it was tradition that the father gave the baby the name. So when Zechariah time came for John the Baptist to be named, they asked Zechariah what he would call the baby, thinking that they would call him Zechariah Jr. But Elizabeth quickly jumped in, his wife, and said, we'll call him John. Zechariah, who was dumb at the time and couldn't speak, he asked for a slate. They brought him the slate because they couldn't believe that he would agree to what his wife said. And so he wrote on the slate, he will be called John. Do you know why he was called John? Because the angel told Zechariah that the boy's name would be John. And when Jesus was born, the angel told Joseph, you will call him Jesus, which means this. You will give him the name Jesus. You don't name him or tell him who he is. He's come to tell you who you are. You don't give God's Son a name. God's Son gives you a name. And you are to call him Jesus. And then Isaiah goes on to describe what Jesus is going to be like. I don't know if you've ever spent much time around babies watching their personalities develop. But it's really hard when a baby is first born to tell much about what he's going to be like until you watch him develop over time. One of the things that we've been amazed at with little Micah since he was diagnosed with diabetes is when they began treating him, his personality began to emerge. And one of the wonderful parts of being a parent is watching the personality of your child emerge over time. But listen to how Isaiah describes the shoot. That's a he. He talks about him in an amazing way. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom and understanding." Now, every parent wants his kid to be smart. But that's not what Isaiah said. Isaiah said, the spirit of wisdom and understanding will be on this man. There's a difference between being smart or being brilliant and being wise. And what Isaiah says, that this shoot who's going to be born at Christmas time, one of the things that distinguishes this man is when he grows up into manhood, he will not just be smart, he will be wise. And he won't just be wise, he will be understanding. We bought Jordan a puzzle for just have around the house, and it's 4 puzzles in one. And so when I was at the store, I said, "Jordan, you want to buy this puzzle?" "No, I don't want to buy it." I said, "Well, why don't we just buy it, and we'll take it home and see if you like it." He said, "Okay, we'll do that." So we get home, we take the wrapping off the puzzle, and Jordan starts trying to put the puzzle together. Now, Jordan is a pretty smart kid. But you know, when it comes to puzzles, you need somebody to help you put it together the first time. And so when we put the puzzle together and Jordan figured out where everything went, he dumped it out and he put it all back together. And you have to have somebody to help you put the pieces of the puzzle together. Jesus was full of the spirit of wisdom because he understands how life fits together. It's a spirit of wisdom and understanding. And then it says he will be given a spirit of counsel and might, which means that Jesus isn't just wise, he isn't just understanding, he wants to counsel you. Jesus just didn't come here to show off how smart he is, or wise he is, or understanding he is. He came here to counsel people. It's a relational kind of thing. He has the spirit of counsel. So when you go to Jesus with problems and difficulties and questions, he counsels you. And then it says he has a spirit of might. He has strength we don't have. The spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight will be in the fear of the Lord. Then it says Jesus will not judge by what his eyes see or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he will judge the poor. When the Pharisees and the leaders of the Jewish community wanted to stump Jesus, they brought a woman who was caught in adultery in the very act, and they brought her to Jesus, and they asked him what should be done, knowing that the Jewish law said that she should be stoned. And they all picked up stones, and they were all ready to stone this girl. and they were waiting for what Jesus would say. They were putting him in the middle of a dilemma, anxious to see how he would go. And so Jesus knelt down and began writing in the sand, because he doesn't judge by what his eyes see. He doesn't decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness, he judges the poor. What he saw was a woman who had been caught in the very act of adultery by men who wanted to exploit her to public disgrace. That's what Jesus saw. What he heard them say was they were wondering what he was going to do to this woman. So he knelt down, being a man of righteousness, and how he responded was amazing. He said, well, let him who's without sin go ahead and throw the first rock. And then we're told, as the story is related by John, that one by one, from the oldest to the youngest, they dropped the rocks and walked away. Because Jesus judges not by what his eyes see. He decides disputes not just by what his ears hear, but he judges with righteousness, and he judges the poor. He decides with equity for the meek of the earth. In other words, Jesus cuts people slack who don't have the privilege of being represented by anybody else. Poor people who can't afford a lawyer. Meek people who don't have clout with the political community. Jesus speaks for them. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. And then it says, righteousness will be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. A shoot will come out of a stump that people thought was dead. And this shoot will be a man. And he will have the Spirit of God himself on him. And he will do amazing things. What Isaiah is doing is describing Christmas and the effects of the arrival of Jesus on this planet. Now you fast forward 30 years, and Jesus has left his own city, his own town, and he comes back. And Luke describes what happens when he comes back. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, as was his custom. He went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. So Jesus comes back to his own town. These people have watched him grow up. They watched him arrive when he was about 3 or 4. They watched him all through his life until he left town. They give him a scroll to read in the synagogue there, and it just so happens they give him the scroll that Isaiah wrote. And Jesus read these words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. We've heard those words before. Those are the words we just read. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to whom? To poor people. To people who can't afford to buy food, who can't afford to have a place to live, people who can't afford to have a beast of burden, people who can't afford the money they need to just be able to exist in life. And Jesus says that his Father, this Spirit of God, told him to come here and tell those people good news. That's what Christmas is all about. A shoot coming out of a dead stump whose arrival on this planet was to go tell poor people good news. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, people who are addicts, people who have anger problems, people who have money problems, people who are trapped and captive to unforgiveness because they can't forgive somebody in their family, or they can't forgive a colleague at work, or they can't forgive a relative, or they can't forgive somebody that they love and care about as a friend. And so they're captivated. And they carry around anger and resentment and frustration and make that person the center of their universe, and they're constantly upset and mad, and they can't get rid of it. And Jesus says that's why the shoot has come. He has come to set captive people free. And the recovery of sight to blind people, people who've been in darkness, who have to feel around to get down the street, people who haven't been able to see what their relatives and friends look like. They know their voice, but they don't know what they look like. And Jesus says, I have come, this shoot has come out of this stump to help blind people see again and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. I remember a guy telling me one time that he said, have you ever been in a pool and tried to keep a beach ball under the water? He said, have you ever tried to keep 2 beach balls under the water? Have you ever tried to keep 3 beach balls under the water? He said there are people in life that are so oppressed and they're so tied that they have never experienced the freedom of not being oppressed. Jesus came to set captives free, to help blind people see, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim good news to the poor, a shoot coming out of a stump. And Jesus, at Christmas time, reminds all of us that is the point of celebrating Christmas. God is basically saying, when he sends Jesus, who was a shoot out of a stump, this is the best I got. It's the best I have. This is my son. And when he comes to Nazareth, he's the best heaven's got. And the people of Nazareth take offense at him. It's odd that when God's favor rests on somebody, that the people look at this person and take offense at him. What God's best is given, they take offense at. And that's the story of Christmas. Because Jesus has come as a shoot out of a dry stump to set people free. Thirdly, it's a peace that passes understanding from the root. Christmas is a time when everybody wants his past forgotten and his present remembered. It's a conspiracy of love. But I want you to listen to how Isaiah describes the land when he began to prophesy to the people of Israel. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and raw wounds. They are not pressed out or bound up or softened with oil. Your country lies desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, foreigners devour your land. It is desolate as overthrown by foreigners. And the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard, like a lodge in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the teaching of our God, you people of Gomorrah. The land was a mess. Now listen to what is described after the shoot comes out of the stump. And Jesus is described as a person on whom the Spirit of God rests. Listen to what Isaiah says next. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. I don't know if you know much about predators, but wolves are predators, and wolves stalk lambs. Wolves stalk sheep that are outside the flock. And yet Jesus and Isaiah describe a community, a civilization where the wolf dwells with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fatted calf together, and a little child shall lead them. This you cannot conceptualize what this even looks like. A wolf dwelling with a lamb, a leopard lying down with the young goat, the calf and the lion and the fatted calf together. How can that possibly be? Because a little child will lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Why did Christmas happen? Why did the shoot come out of the stump? Why did life come from death? Why did resurrection come from crucifixion? So that the whole earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place will be glorious. I mean, we have porch pirates at Christmas. How is the wolf going to lie with the lamb? How's the leopard going to lie down with the young goat? Because Jesus Christ, the shoot from the stump of Jesse, has come to radically change people's hearts. And predators cease being predators, and they lie down together. Now this morning, I don't know where your life is. Maybe this seems like it's absurd to you. Maybe it's a shoot coming from a stump. Maybe you've thought that part of your life is completely and totally over. There will never come any more life from it. There are parts of your life that have been devastated and disappointing, and no life will ever come from that again. All that comes from that part of your life is hurt and pain and frustration. And that's just the way it is. But Isaiah says, a shoot will come from the stump of Jesse. Life will come from death. Hope will come from despair. And that is the message of Christmas. You just have to give God time to do it. You see, Isaiah, it was the year 739 BC. And the shoot came from the stump around 2 or 3 BC. That much time elapsed before God was ready for Jesus to come. But when God is ready, life comes from death. And there may be some of you here this morning who've been nursing grudges and nursing hurt and nursing difficulty and nursing despair and nursing who knows what. Addictions, captive, pool, what you name it. The shoot can come from the stump if you trust Jesus to do it. I don't know if you've ever heard of a gentleman named Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo was a Frenchman. He lived in France, and he was a prolific writer. He was a very gifted writer, and Napoleon III banished him from France because of some of his beliefs. His life just was devastated, and he didn't know what to do. And so he was sent to what everybody thought would be oblivion, that they would never hear from Victor Hugo again. But it was during this time of adversity, during this time of oblivion, that Victor Hugo found himself. And he began to write books that were the most successful novels of his entire career. One of the books that he wrote was a book about grace. A book about Jean Valjean. A book called Les Miserables. Many of you have read that book or been to the play or heard the music, and you've heard music that came from the depths of what Victor Hugo wrote about. That book was published simultaneously in 10 languages. Victor Hugo said this: "Why was I not exiled before?" Because it was out of death that life came. It was out of despair that hope came. It was out of unforgiveness that forgiveness came. It was out of anger that grace came. And that's what God wants to do for all of us this Christmas. Isaiah said, the shoot came out of a stump, the stump of Jesse, and we've never been the same. So this morning, I would encourage you, as we are about on the threshold of sharing a time with our families of Christmas, times that can be tough, times that could resurrect old hurts, that you would allow God to do in you what he did to this old stump. That out of death, life would come. We sang an invitation at the cantata this year. I'm going to ask Van to come and sing it for us, and then we'll ask all of us to join together. But before he comes, let me pray with all of us.